The gates of Shadowfang territory clanged shut behind her with a finality that echoed through Clara's bones. She stood in the gray pre-dawn light, her thin nightgown offering no protection against the bitter mountain wind, and watched the only home she'd ever known seal itself against her like a wound closing over infection. Her uncle's voice still rang in her ears. Traitor's whore, you carry the spawn of an enemy, you are no longer Pack. 3 days ago, Marcus had been alive. 3 days ago, she had been the niece of Alpha Thornwood, respected if not beloved, her pregnancy a source of quiet joy rather than a death sentence. 3 days ago, her mate had kissed her forehead and promised to return from his border patrol before sunset. They had dragged his body back at midnight instead. Clara pressed her palm against her swollen belly, feeling the flutter of movement beneath her skin. 7 months. She was 7 months pregnant, barefoot, and standing on a frost-hardened road with nothing but the clothes she'd been wearing when they'd ripped her from her bed. He wasn't a spy. The thought burned through her like acid. Marcus had been a scholar, a record keeper, a gentle wolf who preferred books to battles. The accusation that he'd been feeding information to rival packs was absurd, but her uncle had never needed truth when suspicion served his purposes better. She had seen the real communications, hidden in her uncle's own study, messages to border raiders promising safe passage in exchange for gold. She had stumbled upon them while searching for her mate's belongings, something to hold on to while she grieved, and suddenly Marcus's execution made terrible sense. Her uncle was the traitor, and he had killed her mate to bury his own crimes. The wind cut through her nightgown like knives, and Clara forced her trembling legs to move. She couldn't stay here. If she collapsed at the gates, the patrol guards would find her body by morning. If the cold didn't kill her first, her uncle's assassins would. She had seen the look in his eyes when he'd pronounced her exile. He expected her to die. He was counting on it. I won't give him the satisfaction. Her wolf, silent since the moment she'd felt her mate bond shatter, stirred weakly in her chest. The animal was broken, grieving, barely present, but not dead. Not yet. Clara walked. The first day blurred into exhaustion and hunger. She followed the main road south, knowing only that the capital lay in that direction, that the Alpha King had issued some kind of decree about pregnant wolves. She had heard whispers about it before her world collapsed. Something about sanctuary, protection, a call for vulnerable she-wolves to come to the palace. It had seemed irrelevant then. She had a pack. She had a mate. She had a home. Now she had nothing but the desperate hope that the rumors were true. By the second day, her feet were bleeding. She had wrapped them in strips torn from her nightgown's hem, but the makeshift bandages did little against the rocks and thorns of the forest path. She ate what she could find: bitter berries, a handful of nuts, water from a stream that tasted of iron and old leaves. The baby kicked constantly, as if sensing her distress. Clara talked to her daughter as she walked, her voice cracked and hoarse from thirst. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. "I'm going to find us somewhere safe, somewhere they can't hurt us." "Lies," her wolf whispered back. "We're dying. The pup is dying. What's the point?" Clara gritted her teeth and kept walking. The third day brought rain, cold, relentless, soaking through what remained of her clothing until she couldn't stop shivering. Her vision blurred. Her thoughts grew fuzzy and disconnected. She kept putting one foot in front of the other because stopping meant death, and she refused to die carrying Marcus's child in her belly, the last piece of him the world would ever know. "Not a traitor," she thought fiercely. "My daughter will know the truth about her father. She'll know he was good and kind and innocent." But first, Clara had to survive. She saw the palace gates through a haze of fever and exhaustion, convinced at first that she was hallucinating. Massive iron bars stretched toward the gray sky, flanked by guard towers flying the Nightshade banner. Beyond them rose the palace itself, a sprawling fortress of dark stone that looked like it had grown from the mountain rather than been built upon it. Clara's legs gave out 50 feet from the entrance. She crawled. The guards saw her coming. She watched them exchange glances, saw one of them take a step forward as if to help, then hesitate. She must have looked like a ghost. Filthy, bleeding, barely human, her pregnant belly straining against the remains of her nightgown. "Please," she gasped, reaching the gates and pulling herself upright against the iron bars. "Please, I heard. The king's decree. Pregnant wolves." "The intake process begins at dawn," one guard said, not unkindly. "You can wait in the shelter with the others." Clara looked where he pointed and saw a wooden structure beside the gates, crowded with huddled figures. Other pregnant wolves, she realized. Dozens of them, maybe more, all waiting to be processed like livestock at market. Something in her cracked. She had crawled through the mud for 3 days. She had watched her mate murdered. She had been thrown out of her home to die, branded a traitor's whore by the man who was actually guilty of treason. And now she was expected to wait her turn in a glorified cattle pen? No, her wolf rose inside her, broken and grieving and half dead, but suddenly, savagely furious. "I have information about border attacks," Clara heard herself say, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "Intelligence that directly threatens this kingdom. I will share it only with the Alpha King himself." The guards stared at her. "You're in no condition to—" one began. "I am Clara Shadowfang, niece of Alpha Thornwood of the Shadowfang Pack." She forced herself to stand straight despite the agony in her feet, despite the trembling in her limbs. "My mate was executed 3 days ago because he stumbled onto evidence of treason. I escaped with that same evidence burned into my memory. You can either take me to your king, or you can explain to him later why you turned away the one person who knows exactly when and where the next attack on this palace will occur." Silence stretched between them. Then the gates began to open. They escorted her through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, past curious servants and whispering courtiers, upstairs that made her vision swim with every step. Clara focused on breathing, on staying upright, on not collapsing before she reached whoever sat at the end of this endless march. She had no actual evidence, she reminded herself grimly. Everything she knew was in her head. The documents she'd seen, the patrol schedules she'd memorized, the names she'd recognized. It would be her word against her uncle's. But she had made it this far. She would make them believe her. The study doors opened onto warmth and firelight. Clara blinked against the sudden brightness, her eyes adjusting slowly to reveal walls lined with books, a massive desk covered in maps and correspondence, and him. Alpha King Victor Nightshade rose from his chair, and the world stopped. He was enormous, taller than any wolf she'd ever seen, broad-shouldered and hard-muscled beneath a simple black shirt. His dark hair fell past his collar, and his face was all sharp angles and shadows, a brutal kind of beauty that made her chest tighten with something she couldn't name. But it was his eyes that held her. Steel gray, cold as winter, ancient in a way that had nothing to do with age. They swept over her with an assessment that felt almost physical, and then they locked onto hers. And Clara felt the floor drop away beneath her. Warmth flooded her chest like liquid fire, spreading through her veins, pooling low in her belly. Her wolf, broken, silent, grieving her dead mate, surged forward with a howl that echoed through every nerve in her body. Mate. Impossible. She had been mated. She had loved Marcus with everything she had. His mark still scarred her shoulder, the ghost of a bond she would carry forever. But her wolf didn't care about impossibilities. Her wolf was clawing toward the surface, desperate and keening, straining toward the man across the room with a need that defied everything Clara knew about herself. Victor's pen clattered to the desk. His nostrils flared, inhaling sharply, and Clara watched his eyes bleed from gray to molten gold. A sound rumbled from his chest, not quite a growl, not quite a groan, and his hands shot out to grip the edge of his desk. The wood splintered under his fingers. "Impossible," he rasped. Clara's legs buckled. She caught herself against the doorframe, one hand pressed to her racing heart, the other curled protectively over her belly. This couldn't be happening. She was pregnant with another man's child, grieving another man's death, and every nerve in her body was screaming that this cold-eyed king was hers. The Alpha King stared at her across the wreckage of his desk, gold eyes burning in a face gone rigid with shock. Neither of them moved. Neither of them breathed. And Clara understood, with dawning horror, that nothing would ever be simple again. The silence stretched between them like a living thing, thick and suffocating. Clara's fingers dug into the doorframe hard enough to send splinters beneath her nails, but she couldn't feel the pain. She couldn't feel anything except the impossible fire burning through her veins, the desperate howl of her wolf straining toward a man she had never met. Victor moved first. He came around his desk in 3 long strides, and Clara's body betrayed her. She flinched backward, her shoulders hitting the door behind her, her free hand flying up in a gesture that was half surrender, half defense. The movement seemed to strike him like a physical blow. He stopped dead, still 6 feet away, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "You're afraid of me." His voice was rough, scraping over the words like they cost him something. "I don't know you." Clara hated how small she sounded, how broken. 3 days ago, she had been a woman with a home and a future. Now she was a ghost in a ruined nightgown, trembling before a king while her body screamed that he belonged to her. "I don't understand what's happening." "Neither do I." The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. Victor's jaw tightened, his gold eyes flickering with something that might have been frustration or fear or both. He inhaled again, slower this time, and Clara watched a shudder run through his massive frame. "You carry another's child," he said. Not an accusation, a statement of fact, spoken through gritted teeth. "You bear another's mark." Clara's hand flew to her shoulder, to the scarred ridges of Marcus's claiming bite. The skin felt strange beneath her fingers, colder than it should have been, somehow distant, as if the mark were fading even as she touched it. "My mate is dead." The words came out steadier than she expected. 3 days dead. Murdered by my own uncle on false charges of treason. Victor's expression shifted. The predatory hunger in his eyes banked slightly, replaced by something sharper, more dangerous. Thornwood accused his own niece's mate of treachery and executed him without trial, then exiled me at dawn, expecting the cold and the wild to finish what he started. Clara forced herself to release the doorframe, to stand on her own 2 bleeding feet. "I came here because I heard the king offered sanctuary to pregnant wolves. I stayed because I have information that could save your kingdom." She lifted her chin, meeting those burning gold eyes despite every instinct screaming at her to submit, to bare her throat, to let him claim what her wolf insisted was already his. "I did not come here to find a second mate before my first is cold in the ground." Something flickered across Victor's face. Pain, perhaps, or understanding. He took a deliberate step backward, putting more distance between them, and Clara felt the absence like a physical wound. "You need food," he said. "Medical attention. Rest. I need you to listen to me. Thornwood is the real traitor. He's been selling patrol schedules to border raiders, accepting gold in exchange for—" "I believe you." Clara's mouth snapped shut. She stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You... what?" "I have suspected corruption in the Shadowfang territory for months. Attacks that struck too precisely. Raiders who knew exactly where our patrols would be weakest." Victor's hands unclenched slowly, deliberately, as if he were forcing himself to relax. I sent investigators. 2 of them never returned. The third came back with nothing but excuses and empty assurances from your uncle. Marcus. The name caught in her throat. My mate was a record keeper, a scholar. He noticed discrepancies in the border patrol logs, patterns that didn't make sense. He was getting close to the truth when they killed him. Clara couldn't finish the sentence. Her vision blurred with tears she'd been too exhausted to shed for days, and suddenly, her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. She was falling, the world tilting sideways, and then arms caught her. Victor's scent surrounded her, pine and wood smoke and something deeper, wilder, that made her wolf keen with recognition. She should have fought him, should have pushed away, demanded he release her, maintained the distance that was all she had left of her dignity. Instead, she pressed her face against his chest and sobbed. He didn't speak, didn't move, simply held her upright while her body shook with grief and exhaustion, and the terrible, consuming awareness of his skin against hers. The mate bond pulsed between them like a second heartbeat, demanding acknowledgement, demanding completion. Neither of them gave in. After what felt like hours, Clara forced herself to pull back. Victor released her immediately, though she caught the way his hands trembled as they fell to his sides. His eyes had faded back to gray, though flecks of gold still swirled in their depths, like embers refusing to die. I'm assigning you quarters in the royal wing, he said. His voice was steady now, controlled. Every inch the Alpha King rather than the man who had just held her while she wept. Not the communal housing. You'll have your own rooms, your own guards, direct access to the palace healers. That's not necessary. It is. A muscle jumped in his jaw. You carry intelligence vital to the crown. You are under my personal protection until the threat from Shadowfang is eliminated. He paused, and something raw flickered behind his careful mask. And you are what you are, to me. I will not pretend otherwise, but neither will I act on it. Not until you choose. Not until you're ready. Clara stared at him. In her experience, powerful men took what they wanted. Her uncle had certainly never asked permission for anything in his life. Yet here stood the most powerful wolf in the kingdom, visibly fighting his own instincts, offering her space she hadn't known she needed. Why? She whispered. Victor's smile was bitter. Because I have waited 200 years for a mate. I will not destroy the gift by rushing what should be given freely. He turned away, moving toward the door. I'll send for the healers. Rest tonight. Tomorrow we'll discuss what you know about your uncle's operations. He was almost to the threshold when Clara spoke again. Victor. He stopped, turned, and for just a moment the hunger was back in his eyes, raw and aching and desperately hopeful. Thank you, she said, for believing me. He inclined his head once, sharply, and then he was gone. Clara stood alone in the fire-lit study, one hand pressed to her racing heart, the other curved over her belly where her daughter still kicked and turned. Her wolf had gone quiet again, but not in grief, in something that felt almost like anticipation. She didn't know what to do with that. So she did the only thing she could. She waited for the healers to come, and she tried not to think about gold eyes and splintered wood, and the way her broken heart had started beating again. The chambers Victor had assigned her were obscene in their luxury. Clara stood in the doorway, swaying slightly despite the healer's ministrations, and tried to reconcile the silk-draped bed with the cattle pen she'd been prepared to sleep in. There must be some mistake, she said to the servant who had guided her here, a young woman with nervous hands and kind eyes. This is too much. I'm just a refugee. You're under the king's personal protection. The servant, Mira, she'd introduced herself, busied herself lighting candles around the room. These were the quarters of his late mother. No one has used them in decades. Clara's throat tightened. She thought of her own mother, dead in childbirth, leaving her to be raised by an uncle who had apparently been corrupt long before she'd noticed. Why would he give me his mother's rooms? Mira hesitated. Something flickered in her expression, curiosity, perhaps, or speculation, before she smoothed it away behind a servant's careful blankness. The king's reasons are his own, my lady, but I can tell you that he doesn't make such gestures lightly. Before Clara could respond, a soft knock came at the door. Mira opened it to reveal Victor himself, carrying a silver tray laden with food. The sight was so incongruous, the Alpha King playing servant, that Clara could only stare. "Leave us," Victor said to Mira. Not unkind, but brooking no argument. The servant vanished with a curtsy, and Clara found herself alone with the man whose mere presence made her skin feel too tight for her bones. Victor set the tray on a small table near the fire. Clara caught the scent of fresh bread, roasted meat, something sweet that made her empty stomach cramp with want. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten real food. "The kitchen staff wanted to bring this," Victor said, not looking at her. "I told them I would do it myself." "Why?" His shoulders tensed. For a long moment he didn't answer. Then finally, "Because I needed to see that you were settled, that you had everything you required." He turned to face her, and the careful control in his expression cracked slightly. "Because my wolf hasn't stopped howling since you walked into my study, and the only thing keeping me sane is knowing you're safe within my walls." Clara's breath caught. She understood that pull. It was screaming through her own veins, demanding she close the distance between them, that she bury her face in his neck and breathe him in until his scent replaced every other memory. But Marcus's mark still ached on her shoulder. His child still grew in her belly, and no matter what her wolf wanted, Clara wasn't ready to feel anything except grief. "Eat," Victor said, the word rough. "The child needs strength, even if you don't care about your own." He turned toward the door and something in Clara cracked open. "Wait." She didn't know why she said it. Victor stopped, his hand on the doorframe, but he didn't turn around. Clara saw the rigid line of his spine, the way his muscles trembled with the effort of holding himself still. "I haven't forgotten that I'm mated," she said quietly. "That I was mated. That his mark is still on my skin and his daughter is still in my body. I don't know what the bond between us means or why it exists, but I need you to understand. I'm not ready. I may never be ready. And if that's a problem, it isn't." Victor's voice was barely above a whisper. "I told you, Clara. I've waited 200 years. I can wait longer." He left without looking back. Clara stood alone in the candlelit chamber, her chest aching with a confused tangle of grief and guilt, and something terrifyingly close to hope. After a long moment, she moved to the table and lifted the silver cover from the tray. Beneath it, folded beside a plate of still warm food, was a handwritten note. "You are safe here. No one will question you tonight." The handwriting was bold and slashing, the letters pressed deep into the parchment as if the writer had been fighting some internal battle while forming them. Clara read the words 3 times, committing them to memory, and then she did something she hadn't done since Marcus died. She ate. 3 days passed in a blur of sleep and food and gentle ministrations from palace healers who clucked over her bleeding feet and feverish temperature. Victor didn't visit her chambers again, but she saw evidence of him everywhere. Fresh flowers on her windowsill each morning, books appearing on her bedside table that seemed chosen specifically to match her interests, a healer who mentioned casually that the king had personally ensured she received the best care available. He was courting her, Clara realized, not with demands or expectations, but with small kindnesses that asked nothing in return. She didn't know what to do with that either. On the 4th day, she felt strong enough to venture beyond her rooms. The guards at her door, two massive wolves in nightshade livery, fell into step behind her without comment as she made her way toward the great hall. Victor had summoned her to present her intelligence about Thornwood's operations, and Clara had spent the morning gathering her thoughts, organizing every detail she could remember into a coherent narrative. She was so focused on her upcoming testimony that she almost didn't notice the woman blocking her path. Lady Lyra Valewood was beautiful in the way of poisonous flowers, all sharp edges and dangerous elegance, her dark hair coiled atop her head like a crown, her green eyes glittering with barely concealed malice. She stood in the center of the corridor with three other noblewomen arranged behind her like a court of judgment. "So this is the king's latest charity case," Lyra said, her voice carrying easily through the hallway. "I'd heard rumors, but I didn't quite believe them. A pregnant cast-off from a traitor pack? Given the late queen's own chambers?" She laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut. "Victor must be desperate indeed to scrape this low." Clara's wolf rose to the surface, bristling with sudden fury. "How dare she?" "I don't believe we've been introduced," Clara said, keeping her voice level with an effort that cost her dearly. "And I'm afraid I don't have time for court gossip. The king is expecting me." "The king is expecting a great many things from you, I imagine." Lyra's smile sharpened. "Tell me, does your dead mate's spirit rest easier knowing you've spread your legs for his replacement so quickly? Or do traitors' whores have no shame at all?" The words hit like a physical blow. Clara felt the blood drain from her face, felt her hands curl into fists at her sides, felt her wolf snarl with a rage that demanded violence. Before she could respond, a sound rolled through the corridor, a growl so deep and powerful that the stone floor seemed to vibrate with it. Victor stepped out of the shadows near the great hall's entrance. His eyes were pure molten gold, his lips pulled back from teeth that had gone sharp and wolfish, and the raw fury radiating from him made Clara's knees threaten to buckle. "Lyra!" Her name emerged as something barely human. "Step away from her, now!" The noblewoman's face went pale, but she held her ground. "Your Majesty, I was simply—" "You were insulting a woman under my personal protection. You were disrespecting a guest of this palace who has risked her life to bring vital intelligence to the crown." Victor moved forward, and the three noble women behind Lyra scattered like frightened deer. "You called her damaged goods. You called her a traitor's whore." Clara watched Lyra's throat bob as she swallowed. "I meant no—" "Let me be clear." Victor's voice dropped to something quiet and infinitely more terrifying than his snarl. "Clara Shadowfang is under my protection. Any who disrespect her disrespect their king. Any who harm her answer to me personally." He took another step closer, and Lyra stumbled backward. "From this moment, you are stripped of your position in my court. You will confine yourself to your chambers until I decide what to do with you. And if I ever hear you speak ill of this woman again, I will have your tongue." Lyra fled. Clara stood frozen in the corridor, her heart pounding, her wolf purring with savage satisfaction at the sight of Victor defending her with such ferocity. He turned to her, and the gold in his eyes faded slowly back to gray. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have anticipated that the court would be difficult." "You didn't have to do that." Clara's voice came out smaller than she intended. "I can fight my own battles." "I know you can." Victor's expression softened. "I saw you stand up to my guards at the gate when you could barely stand at all. But you shouldn't have to fight alone. Not anymore." He extended his hand toward her. Not to touch, not to claim, simply an offer. Clara looked at that offered hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and laid her fingers against his palm. The mate bond surged between them like lightning, warm and electric and achingly right. Victor's breath caught. Clara's wolf rose toward the surface, no longer grieving, no longer silent, ready, finally, to believe that safety might be possible. "Come," Victor said, his voice rough. Let's tell the court what your uncle has done." And for the first time since Marcus died, Clara felt something other than despair. She felt hope. Clara walked into the great hall with Victor's hand warm against her palm, and every head in the room turned toward them. The hall was magnificent, vaulted ceilings that seemed to stretch toward the heavens, massive pillars carved with wolves frozen mid-hunt, and windows that flooded the space with afternoon light. But Clara barely registered the architecture. Her attention was fixed on the sea of faces before her, dozens of nobles and advisors and warriors who had fallen silent the moment she appeared at their king's side. "They're all staring at our joined hands." The realization sent heat crawling up her neck, but she refused to let go. Victor had offered, and she had accepted. She would not show weakness now. "My lords and ladies," Victor's voice rang out strong and commanding, "I present Clara Shadowfang, who has traveled from the northern territories to bring crucial intelligence about threats to our borders." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Clara caught fragments. Shadowfang territory. Pregnant. The decree. But Victor's grip tightened slightly, grounding her. "She will address the council directly," Victor continued. "You will listen with respect, or you will leave." He led her to the raised dais at the hall's far end, where a long table held maps and correspondence. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as she faced the assembled court, acutely aware of how she must look. Still gaunt from her journey, wearing borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit, belly swollen with another man's child. "They think I'm nothing. Show them otherwise." "Alpha Thornwood of the Shadowfang Pack is a traitor." Her voice came out stronger than she expected, clear and sharp in the vast space. The murmuring stopped. For the past 2 years, he has been selling patrol schedules to the border raiders who have been attacking the kingdom's northern settlements. He receives payment in gold and promises of expanded territory once the crown falls. A man near the front, silver-haired and severe-faced, leaned forward. "These are serious accusations, girl. What proof do you offer?" "My name is Clara," she said evenly, "and I have seen the correspondence myself. Hidden in my uncle's study, in a compartment beneath the floorboards, letters promising safe passage for gold, maps marking which patrols would be absent on which nights." "And how did you come to see these documents?" "Because my mate—" Her voice caught. She forced herself to continue. "Because Marcus, my mate, was the pack's record keeper. He noticed discrepancies in the patrol logs, schedules that had been changed at the last moment, guards reassigned without explanation. He traced the alterations to my uncle's orders." Clara felt Victor's steady presence beside her, a pillar of warmth she hadn't known she needed. "When Marcus tried to report what he'd found, my uncle had him accused of the very treason he'd uncovered. Marcus was executed without trial, and she placed her hand over her belly. "I was exiled at dawn and left to die in the wilderness." The hall had gone completely silent. "Your Majesty?" The silver-haired man turned to Victor. "If this is true, the implications are staggering. Shadowfang territory controls 3 of our major northern passes." "I'm aware." Victor's voice was ice. "I sent 3 investigators to Shadowfang over the past year. 2 disappeared. The 3rd returned with excuses and nothing more." His eyes swept the room. "I believe he was bought." Clara watched the reactions ripple through the court. Shock, outrage, calculation. She saw who leaned forward with concern and who pulled back with careful neutrality. Already cataloging, already analyzing. This is what Marcus and I used to do together. Watch the room, read the players, find the truth hiding in the spaces between words. Her throat tightened with grief, but beneath it, something else stirred. Purpose. "We must move against Shadowfang immediately," someone called out. "With what proof beyond this woman's word?" another voice countered. "She could be spinning tales to avenge a traitor husband." Clara's wolf surged forward, hackles rising, but before she could respond, Victor's hand came to rest at the small of her back. Not restraining, supporting. My investigators have already been dispatched, Victor said. They carry orders to search the Alpha's private quarters for the correspondence Clara described. If it exists, they will find it. And if they don't? Victor's smile held no warmth. Then I will go myself. And I am considerably harder to buy. The discussion continued for another hour. Strategy, logistics, the delicate question of how to handle a pack whose alpha had betrayed the crown. Clara answered what questions she could, providing details about Shadowfang's defenses, its warriors, the layout of her uncle's stronghold. By the time Victor called an end to the session, her legs were trembling with exhaustion. But she had done it. She had stood before the court and spoken her truth, and they had listened. Victor guided her out through a side entrance, away from the press of bodies and the weight of staring eyes. The corridor was cool and quiet, lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. "You are magnificent," he said, his voice low. Clara leaned against the wall, suddenly so tired she could barely stand. "I was terrified." "I know." Victor positioned himself between her and the corridor, shielding her from view as she caught her breath. "I could hear your heart racing, but you never faltered. You never let them see your fear." Marcus used to say that courage wasn't the absence of fear. Clara closed her eyes, remembering. He said it was choosing to act despite it. He sounds like a wise man. He was the best man I ever knew. Clara's voice cracked. And my uncle murdered him because he got too close to the truth. Victor was silent for a moment. Then, carefully, giving her time to pull away, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Your uncle will answer for what he's done, I swear it." Clara opened her eyes and found Victor watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Gold flickered at the edges of his irises, his wolf pressing close to the surface. "Mine," her own wolf insisted. "Ours." But how could she think of claiming another mate when Marcus had been dead for barely a week? How could her heart beat faster at Victor's touch when she still woke reaching for a man who would never be there again? "You should rest," Victor said, taking a deliberate step back. "I'll have Mira bring dinner to your chambers." "Victor." "You've done enough for today, Clara." His voice was gentle but firm. "Your uncle's treachery will take time to address. There's no need to burn yourself out in a single afternoon." She wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her bones, and the child in her belly had begun to shift restlessly, as if sensing her fatigue. "Fine," she conceded. "But tomorrow I want to help with the planning. I know Shadowfang's defenses better than anyone." Victor's lips curved in something that was almost a smile. "I would expect nothing less." 3 days passed in a blur of meetings and strategy sessions. Clara threw herself into the work with a focus that bordered on obsession. She drew maps from memory, marking guard posts and hidden passages, and the secret tunnels her uncle thought no one knew about. She sat with Victor's war council and answered their questions, correcting misconceptions about Shadowfang's strength and exposing vulnerabilities they could exploit. And every night she collapsed into bed exhausted enough that the dreams couldn't find her. It was easier this way. Easier to drown herself in plans and tactics than to face the tangle of emotions that rose whenever Victor looked at her. Easier to focus on vengeance for Marcus than to acknowledge the way her wolf perked up at the sound of Victor's voice, or the warmth that spread through her chest when he brought her tea during late-night planning sessions. "I'm betraying him," she thought sometimes, her hand rising unconsciously to the scar on her shoulder. "Marcus has been dead for 10 days, and already my wolf is reaching for another." But even as guilt gnawed at her, she couldn't deny what she felt when Victor was near. The mate bond hummed between them constantly now, a low thrum of awareness that made her hyper-conscious of his every movement. When their hands brushed over maps, her skin tingled for hours afterward. When he laughed at something she said, rare, but increasingly frequent, her wolf practically purred with satisfaction. It was on the fourth night that everything began to unravel. Clara was studying patrol schedules in Victor's war room when she heard voices in the corridor outside. She wouldn't have paid attention. The palace was always full of people coming and going, except that she recognized one of the speakers, Lyra Valewood. Clara froze, her pen hovering over the parchment. Victor had confined Lyra to her chambers. What was she doing out? Can't simply accept this, Lyra was saying, her voice low and urgent. You've seen how he looks at her, how he defends her. He's planning to make her his Luna, I know it. And what would you have us do? A man's voice, unfamiliar but cultured. The king has made his position clear. The king is blinded by the mate bond. He's not thinking clearly. That woman walks into the palace with a belly full of another man's child, and suddenly, she's the most important person in the realm? Lyra's laugh was bitter. I've spent 3 years building my position, 3 years cultivating his trust, making myself indispensable. I will not lose everything to some pregnant exile. Clara's blood ran cold. Lady Lyra, I urge caution. Caution is what got us here. No, this requires action. Lyra's voice dropped even lower, and Clara had to strain to hear. Her uncle is planning an attack. His raiders have been massing near the northern border for weeks, preparing to move on the capital. How do you know this? Because I've been in contact with him. Silence. Clara pressed her hand over her mouth to stifle her gasp. Thornwood wants his niece back. He believes she has information that could destroy him, and he's right. If his correspondence is found, he loses everything. Lyra's tone turned calculating. But if the palace were to suffer an unfortunate attack, during which Clara Shadowfang happened to die, well, the information dies with her, and I comfort Victor in his grief. You're suggesting treason. I'm suggesting survival. Lyra's voice hardened. I've already sent Thornwood the patrol schedules for the eastern wall. There's a weakness there. A section where the guard rotation leaves a gap every 6 hours. His forces will strike in 3 days. Clara's hands were shaking. She needed to move, needed to warn Victor, but her legs had gone numb with shock. Lyra is working with my uncle. She's going to help him attack the palace. She's going to get me killed. The voices faded as Lyra and her companion moved away down the corridor. Clara sat frozen for a long moment, her mind racing through the implications. Then, slowly, she forced herself to her feet. She had to find Victor. But as she turned toward the door, a sharp pain lanced through her belly. Clara doubled over, gasping, her hand flying to support her swollen abdomen. No, not now. Please, not now. The pain faded after a moment, leaving her shaking and sweating. The child moved beneath her palm, and Clara felt tears prick her eyes with relief. Just stress. It's just stress. She straightened carefully, one hand still pressed to her belly, and made her way toward Victor's chambers. But with every step, her mind kept circling back to what she'd heard. 3 days. She had 3 days to stop an attack that could destroy everything. And somewhere in the palace, Lyra Valewood was plotting her death. Clara's heart pounded against her ribs as she rushed through the darkened corridors toward Victor's chambers. The pain in her belly had subsided to a dull ache, but fear had taken its place, a cold, creeping terror that wrapped around her throat and squeezed. 3 days. Lyra had said 3 days, but something in the noblewoman's voice had felt wrong, too calm, too certain, as if the timeline was already in motion and couldn't be stopped. Clara rounded a corner and nearly collided with Mira, who was carrying a tray of empty dishes back toward the kitchens. "My lady!" Mira steadied the tray, her eyes widening at Clara's expression. "What's wrong? You look... Where is the king?" Clara gripped Mira's arm, perhaps too tightly. "I need to find him now. He was called to the eastern wall an hour ago. Something about a disturbance in the eastern wall. Clara didn't wait for Mira to finish. She turned and ran, ignoring the protest of her aching body, ignoring the way her swollen belly threw off her balance with every step. The eastern wall was where Lyra had said the weakness was. The eastern wall was where the attack would come. 3 days was a lie. It's happening now. She heard the first screams before she reached the outer corridors. The palace erupted into chaos around her. Guards rushed past, shouting orders. Servants fled in the opposite direction, their faces pale with terror. Somewhere in the distance, Clara heard the clash of steel against steel, the snarls of wolves in battle, the sickening sound of bodies hitting stone. Her wolf surged forward, no longer broken and grieving but fierce with protective rage. The child in her belly kicked hard, as if sensing the danger, and Clara pressed her hand against the movement. "I won't let them hurt you. I won't let anyone hurt you." She should have gone back. She should have found somewhere safe to hide, let Victor and his warriors handle the attack while she protected herself and her daughter. That was the sensible choice, the smart choice. But sensible choices had never been Clara's strength. She followed the sounds of battle toward the eastern wall, moving through corridors she'd memorized during her days of strategy sessions. The palace layout was burned into her mind now. Every passage, every shortcut, every hidden route that could bring her closer to the fighting. And closer to Lyra. Because Clara knew, with a certainty that settled into her bones like ice, that Lyra wouldn't be hiding during the attack she'd helped orchestrate. The noblewoman would be watching, waiting, making sure her plan succeeded. Clara found her exactly where she expected, on the battlements above the eastern gate, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her green eyes fixed on the chaos below, with an expression of terrible satisfaction. "Lyra." The noblewoman spun, and for a moment genuine shock flickered across her beautiful features. Then her lips curved into a smile that held no warmth at all. "Clara Shadowfang, I'd hoped you would have the good sense to stay in your chambers like a proper broodmare." Lyra's gaze dropped to Clara's belly, contempt twisting her expression. "But then, good sense was never your family's strength, was it? Your uncle certainly didn't have any when he trusted me with his plans. You sold us out." Clara's voice shook with fury. "You gave him the patrol schedules. You told him exactly where to strike. I did what was necessary." Lyra stepped closer, and Clara saw the glint of a blade in her hand, a slim silver dagger that caught the torchlight. "Victor was supposed to be mine. I waited 3 years, positioned myself perfectly, made myself indispensable. And then, you crawled through the gates with your pathetic sob story and your swollen belly. And suddenly, I was nothing." "You were always nothing." The words came out before Clara could stop them. "Victor never wanted you. The mate bond isn't something you can manufacture through scheming and manipulation." Lyra's face contorted with rage. "The mate bond is a fairy tale, a convenient excuse for wolves to abandon their responsibilities and chase whatever pretty thing catches their eye." She raised the dagger. "But fairy tales can be ended. All it takes is one clean cut." She lunged. Clara's wolf moved before her conscious mind could react. Heat exploded through her body, more intense than anything she'd ever felt. Not the gentle warmth of her bond with Marcus, but something fiercer, wilder, drawn from the incomplete connection humming between her and Victor. Her hands shifted. It wasn't a full transformation. She couldn't manage that. Not while pregnant. Not without risking her daughter. But her fingers lengthened into claws, dark fur rippling across her forearms, and when she caught Lyra's wrist, her grip had the strength of something far more than human. Lyra screamed as Clara twisted, forcing the dagger away from her belly. The blade clattered against the stone, and Clara used the momentum to drive Lyra backward, pinning her against the battlements with claws pressed against her throat. "You think I survived 3 days in the wilderness, pregnant and alone, just to let you kill me?" Clara snarled the words, her voice deeper than it should be, roughened by her partial shift. You think I crawled through mud and stone and watched my mate die just to give up now? Get off me, you animal! Clara pressed harder, and Lyra's words dissolved into a choked gasp. Below them, the sounds of battle had shifted. The attackers were being pushed back, Victor's forces rallying now that the initial shock had passed. You're going to tell me everything, Clara said. Every message you sent, every piece of information you gave my uncle, and then you're going to answer for what you've done. I'll tell them you attacked me. Lyra's voice was hoarse, desperate. I'm a noblewoman. You're nothing but a pregnant exile. They'll believe me. The voice came from behind Clara, and despite everything, her wolf sang with recognition. Victor emerged from the shadows of the stairwell, his shirt torn and bloodied, gold eyes blazing in a face carved from fury. Behind him came a dozen warriors in nightshade livery, their weapons drawn, their expressions grim. I heard enough. Victor moved to stand beside Clara, his massive frame radiating heat that cut through the night's chill. I heard her confession. I saw her attack you. Lyra's face went pale. Victor, my king, she's lying. I would never. You would. Victor's voice was ice and death. You did. My wolves found the maps in your chambers, Lyra, the messages with your seal. Your scent on every piece of correspondence you thought you'd hidden. Clara felt the fight drain out of Lyra's body. The noblewoman sagged against the battlements, her green eyes filling with tears that Clara suspected were more performance than genuine emotion. I did it for us, Lyra whispered. For the kingdom. She's not worthy of you. She's broken, pregnant with another man's child, carrying the blood of a traitor. She is my mate. Victor's words cut through the air like a blade. She is worth more than 1,000 scheming nobles who would sell their own kingdom for a crown. He gestured to his warriors. Take her to the cells. She'll face trial at dawn. 2 guards stepped forward to seize Lyra's arms. As they dragged her past, she twisted to look back at Clara, hatred burning in her eyes. This isn't over, she hissed. Your uncle is still out there. He'll never stop hunting you. Her uncle is dead. A warrior appeared at the top of the stairs, breathing hard, blood splattered across his armor. My king. The attack has been repelled. Their leader, Thornwood, he fell in single combat with Commander Aldrich. The remaining raiders have surrendered or fled. Clara's legs gave out. Victor caught her before she hit the ground, his arms wrapping around her with a gentleness that seemed impossible given his size. He lifted her easily, cradling her against his chest, and Clara let herself sink into his warmth. It's over, he murmured against her hair. He's dead. He can't hurt you anymore. Marcus. The name came out broken. Marcus can rest now. Yes. Victor pressed his lips to her forehead. Your mate is avenged. Your daughter is safe. It's over, Clara. She buried her face against his shoulder and let the tears come. 3 days later, Clara stood before the assembled court and watched Lyra Valewood die. The execution was swift and clean. A single stroke of the headsman's blade, Lyra's final scream cut short before it could fully form. Clara had expected to feel satisfaction, or perhaps horror. Instead, she felt only a vast, quiet emptiness, as if a chapter of her life had finally closed. It's finished. All of it. Thornwood, Lyra, the lies and the treachery and the fear. Now what? She knew the answer, had known it since the moment Victor caught her in his arms on the battlements, since the moment she'd felt his heart pounding against her cheek and understood that her wolf had been right all along. Marcus was dead. She would carry him in her heart forever, would tell their daughters stories about the gentle scholar who had loved books and laughter and his small family more than anything in the world. But she was still alive, and her heart, battered and bruised as it was, had room for more than grief. That night, Clara went to Victor's chambers. He was standing by the window when she entered, his massive frame silhouetted against the moonlight. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and his eyes, gray now, calm, though gold flickered at the edges, widened with something that looked almost like hope. Clara. Her name was a prayer on his lips. You shouldn't be out of bed. The healers said, the healers can wait. She crossed the room to stand before him, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. This close, she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could smell the pine and winter wind that clung to him like a second skin. I've been thinking, she said softly, about Marcus, about you, about what it means to love someone and lose them, and what it means to find something new in the ashes of everything you thought your life would be. Victor went very still. Clara, let me finish. She reached up to press her palm against his chest, feeling the thunder of his heart beneath her hand. Marcus was my first love, my first mate. I will never forget him, and I will never stop being grateful for the time we had together. But he's gone, Victor, and you're here, and every moment I spend denying what's between us feels like I'm betraying both of you. I would never ask you to forget him. Victor's voice was rough. I would never expect you to. I know. Clara rose onto her toes, bringing her face closer to his. That's why I'm not asking for your permission. I'm making a choice. My choice. She tilted her head, baring the curve of her neck where Marcus's mark had faded to a pale scar. Victor's breath caught, his eyes flooding gold as his wolf surged forward. Are you certain? The words seemed torn from him. Clara, once this is done, it cannot be undone. You would be bound to me for the rest of our lives. You would be my Luna, my queen, my... I'm certain. Victor made a sound that was half groan, half growl. His hands came up to cup her face, tilting her head back, his thumbs tracing the line of her jaw with a tenderness that made her chest ache. I have waited 200 years for you, he whispered. 200 years of emptiness and duty and watching other wolves find what I thought I would never have. And then you appeared at my gates, half dead and magnificent. And I knew. Knew what? That I would burn kingdoms for you. That I would tear apart anyone who tried to harm you. That I would love you until the stars fell from the sky and the mountains crumbled to dust. His forehead pressed against hers. You are everything, Clara. Everything. Her wolf howled with joy. Victor lowered his mouth to her neck, and Clara felt the scrape of his fangs against her skin. A question, a promise, a claiming that had been building since the moment their eyes first met. Yes, she breathed. He bit down. Pain lanced through her, sharp and bright, and Clara gasped at the intensity of it. But even as the pain registered, it began to transform. Warmth flooding through her veins, pleasure coiling in her belly, something vast and ancient and utterly right settling into her bones. Through the bond, she felt him. 200 years of loneliness crashed into her like a wave. She felt his grief for the family he'd lost to war, his weariness from centuries of carrying a kingdom on his shoulders, his desperate hope that had flared to life the moment she'd stumbled into his study. She felt his love, fierce and protective and all-consuming, and beneath it, a vulnerability he showed to no one else. Mine, his wolf proclaimed through the bond, mate, finally, mine. Clara's own wolf answered with equal ferocity. Victor withdrew his fangs, his tongue soothing over the mark he'd left. Clara sagged against him, overwhelmed by the sensation of their bond snapping fully into place, a golden thread connecting her heart to his, unbreakable and eternal. But she wasn't finished. My turn, she whispered. Victor's eyes widened as she pushed against his chest, urging him back until he hit the wall. She rose onto her toes again, bracing herself against his shoulders, and pressed her mouth to the junction of his neck and shoulder. Clara, you don't have to... I want to. She let her fangs descend, feeling the change ripple through her jaw. I want everyone to know you're mine. I want them to see my mark on your skin and understand that the Alpha King belongs to a pregnant exile who crawled through mud to reach him. She bit. Victor's roar shook the walls. Through the bond, she felt what flowed into him, her grief and her healing, her fear and her growing hope, the fierce love that had taken root in her heart despite every reason it shouldn't have. She felt his shock at the intensity of it, his wonder that she could feel so much for him after everything she'd lost. Yours, she told him through their connection. Always yours. His arms crushed her against his chest as she withdrew her fangs, and Clara tasted blood on her lips. His blood, marking her as surely as her bite had marked him. Mine, Victor growled against her hair. Yours, she whispered back. Mate. They spoke the word together, and the bond between them settled into something permanent and unshakable, a foundation upon which they would build everything that came next. They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms, feeling the steady pulse of their connection. Clara's daughter kicked against her belly, and Victor's hand moved to cover the swell of her abdomen. She's strong, he murmured. Like her mother. She'll need to be, growing up in a palace full of politics and scheming. She'll have us. Victor tilted Clara's chin up, pressing a gentle kiss to her lips. She'll have a mother who faced down traitors and a father who will move mountains to keep her safe. Clara's breath caught. You would claim her? Even though she's not... She is mine. Victor's voice brooked no argument. From this moment forward, she is a nightshade. My daughter. My heir if she wishes it. The circumstances of her birth mean nothing compared to the love she will receive. Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks, and for once, they weren't tears of grief. 2 months later, Clara gave birth to a daughter she named Hope. Victor held the infant in his massive arms with a tenderness that made the attending healers weep, his gold eyes soft as he gazed down at the tiny face. When the kingdom's elders gathered for the naming ceremony, he proclaimed Hope Nightshade, Crown Princess, daughter of the Alpha King and Luna Queen. No one questioned it. No one dared. Clara watched from her throne, a seat beside Victor's that had been empty for 200 years, as the nobles who had once whispered about her damaged goods status bent their knees in reverence. Lady Lyra was dead. Thornwood was dead. The Shadowfang Pack had been dissolved, its members given the choice to swear fealty to the crown or leave the kingdom forever. Most had chosen loyalty. Some had sought Clara out personally, begging forgiveness for their complicity in her exile, for their silence when Marcus had been murdered. She had granted it where she could, carrying the burden of judgment with a grace she hadn't known she possessed. The months that followed were filled with challenges, a kingdom to rebuild, alliances to forge, traditions to navigate. Clara threw herself into her role as Luna Queen with the same fierce determination that had carried her through the wilderness, and Victor watched her with pride that radiated through their bond like sunlight. But there were quiet moments, too. Nights spent curled together before the fire, Hope sleeping peacefully in her cradle nearby. Mornings where Victor brought Clara tea in bed and told her stories of the world beyond the kingdom's borders. Afternoons in the garden, watching their daughter grow, feeling the steady pulse of their mate bond like a second heartbeat. On the first anniversary of Clara's arrival at the palace, she woke to find Victor sitting on the edge of their bed, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What is it? She sat up, reaching for him. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. He took her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. I was just thinking about how different everything is now. A year ago, you were a stranger at my gates. Now you're my queen, my mate, the mother of my daughter. His voice softened. The love of my very long life. Clara pulled him down beside her, settling against his chest with a contentment that still surprised her sometimes. Through the bond, she felt his happiness, deep and settled and utterly secure. I was thinking about Marcus, she admitted quietly, about how he would feel, seeing all of this, seeing hope, seeing me happy. Victor's arms tightened around her. And? I think he would be glad. Clara smiled, her hand resting over Victor's heart. He never wanted me to grieve forever. He would have wanted me to live, to find joy again. She tilted her head back to meet Victor's gaze. To love again. You honor his memory every day. Victor kissed her forehead. In the way you rule, the way you mother, the way you fight for what you believe in. He lives on through you, Clara, through hope. From the nursery, a small cry rose, their daughter waking, demanding attention with all the lung power a future queen could muster. Victor chuckled and rose from the bed, padding barefoot toward the nursery door. But before he left, he paused to look back at Clara, gold flickering in his gray eyes. Come, he said, extending his hand. Our daughter awaits. And after that, I believe there's a council meeting where your sharp mind will be needed to resolve a border dispute. Clara took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Through the window, dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. A year ago, she had been dying, alone, grieving, certain that her life was ending. Now she was Luna Queen, mate to the Alpha King, mother to a princess who would one day rule this kingdom. She had found love in the ashes of loss, built strength from the ruins of betrayal, and discovered that even the most broken things could be made whole again. She pressed her hand against her belly, round again now with Victor's child, a son the healers predicted, and felt her wolf settle into perfect peace. We made it, she thought, watching her mate cradle their daughter in his arms, watching the sunrise paint their kingdom in light. Against everything, we made it. And together they stepped into the dawn,